Hello and welcome to Developing America's Next Generation of Leaders. This is an introductory webinar to the White House Fellows Program. You are being hosted today by the White House Fellows Foundation and Association and our partner, the Latino Business Action Network and the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Margarita Colmenares, and I was a White House Fellow in 1991-92. At the time, I was living in Los Angeles, and I was an executive on loan. At the same time, I was president of the National Society of Hispanic Engineers, SHIP. So I had on two hats, you might say, at the time of my selection. After I left the fellowship, I went back to the private sector, but then I returned again to the public sector to serve at the U.S. Department of Education. And since then, I've worked both in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors, but today I am the Director of Outreach and Recruitment for the White House Fellows Foundation and Association, which is our alumni group. And today, next slide, I'm very pleased to be joined by this stellar cast of alumni. Let me briefly introduce them to you. David Iglesias, class of 94-95, originally from New Mexico, is leading our efforts of outreach to the Latino community. He's an alumni volunteer. Carlos del Toro is joining us from Virginia, and he is a former president of the alumni organization. And Erica Gonzalez is joining us from Los Angeles, and she is in the education sector and one of our more recent graduates. So thank you to all of you for being with us today. Next slide. So the White House Fellowship is considered the nation's premier nonpartisan leadership and service opportunity. Next slide. And over the past 55 years, more than 800 alumni have served over 10 presidential administrations. And what this means is that Democrats serve under Republicans and independents, and Republicans and independents serve under Democrats. Next slide. Oh, thank you. Okay, so today, I'm so sorry we're having interruptions here. Hold on, please, 1 second. So the vision of the White House Fellows Program is to foster and strengthen future leaders for the betterment of our country. Next slide. And our purpose today is to encourage emerging leaders in all fields and regions to consider this incomparable opportunity. So that means you, the audience. We also have with us, though, in the audience, leaders, executives, individuals who can help us find and recruit other persons who should be applying for the White House Fellowship. I say this because I cannot emphasize how many times over my lifetime I've met individuals who are very accomplished and should have applied for the White House Fellowship. But when I ask them, why didn't you apply for the White House Fellowship? The answer is invariably, I didn't know it existed. Next slide. So this is, let me give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to give you some more information, an overview of the White House Fellows Program. We're going to share with you what online resources are available. We're going to have our panel come up and share with us their stories of being a White House Fellow. And at the end, we're going to have a Q&A. However, as the webinar is proceeding, there is a chat session where you can start to ask your questions. And our executive director, David Moore, is behind the scenes, and he will start answering those questions. At the end, if we have to go over time, we will for a little. And if we cannot get to all the questions, we will email the answers to you. Thank you. Next. So with that, let me introduce this short video on the White House Fellows Program. Go ahead and roll.
trying to do is to find here in this country, yes, here in the White House Fellow, a combination of an idealist with vision and a pragmatist with judgment.
This program goes back for 55 years and stretches across all departments of government and presidencies and administrations. And it's an incredible program, and I hope everyone listening will encourage others to apply, to learn more about this. It's something that everyone should know about, even though they may not be a fellow themselves. It's a rich part of the White House tradition, and we're very grateful to President Johnson and those around him for establishing this program.
Founded in 1964, this prestigious program puts the best and brightest physicians, military officers, academics, business leaders, and others to work in the highest levels of government. With direct access to the White House, cabinet secretaries, and world leaders. Many of its alumni have gone on to greater achievement. Colin Powell, historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, Senator Sam Brownback, Paul Gigot of the Wall Street Journal, to name just a few.
I learned most of all how you champion good causes and how you stand up and fight causes that are not good, how you take risks for doing that which is right. And so for me, it was a very formative experience, one that I've treasured ever since.
Year after year, I've enjoyed working with the White House Fellows. Each and every one brings a variety of talents and energy into the government, and in many ways represents my best hopes for our future.
What kind of person do I think should apply for the program? I think would be someone who is committed to servant leadership, just as John Gardner would have said, someone who is ready to give back.
We expect a lot out of you. We expect you to go back to your units or your businesses or your universities or perhaps government agencies and lead, to set high standards, to set a good example, and to serve something greater than yourself. That's what the Fellows Program is all about.
I had this amazing fellowship year. I worked for the First Lady, Hillary Clinton at the time. I think what was interesting is in the beginning of the fellowship, you're sort of trying to find your way and you do everything. And then all of a sudden, by the midpoint of the year, someone comes up to you one day and says, "We have a speech for the First Lady tomorrow. Do you want to write it?" It's these sudden baptisms throughout the year that are wonderful. You feel like you're absolutely not prepared. You can't do it in some ways, and then all of a sudden, you're doing it. And when a year goes by, you can't believe it's over. I think in many ways, the year as a White House Fellow has shaped the rest of my life.
Thank you. By the way, behind the scenes is Jen Swanson. She's our technical wizard making the program happen. So thank you, Jen. So I wanted to start out with giving you a quick overview of the selection criteria, and it involves the following bullet points. A record of remarkable professional achievement in your career, in your chosen career. Evidence of leadership skills and potential for future growth. A demonstrated commitment to public service, and this can be demonstrated by maybe things that you've done in your community service, in your volunteer time, but also it could be something that you've done related to work. You also need to have the skills to succeed at the highest levels of government, since you will be working at a very high level, either assigned to a cabinet secretary or in the White House or one of the agencies. And you must be a US citizen. Next slide. Here are some frequently asked questions. So I wanted to go over them really quickly with you. Who oversees the program? It's overseen by the President's Commission on White House Fellowships and a commission director. Usually in any given year, there's somewhere between 11 and 19 fellows that are selected. And as I said earlier, you'll be assigned either to the White House, a cabinet agency, or department. The time frame for the fellowship is from September through August, which is why you'll notice in our own, when we identify ourselves, we will say class of 91, 92, because we started in September and finished up in August of the following year. Then the fellowship program is a nonpartisan program, and it has been since its inception. The whole idea was to bring in people from all walks of life, from all regions of the country, and to give them this opportunity to learn how government works at the highest levels and to take that information back to their communities, whatever, to their chosen career path, whatever it was they were going to do in the future. And yes, fellows are paid. They are all paid the same level throughout the year. And for some of you, it may be a pay increase. For many, it is not a pay increase, but that is part of serving as a public servant. Next slide. I want to make sure that you're aware that we have these online resources where you can get a plethora of information and insight into the program. The first website is the alumni website, which is whff.org, and the application, which resides at the White House site, which is the second link that you see there, the whitehouse.gov website. Next slide. Now, the type of information that you will find at these websites includes a very detailed selection criteria, and the process is laid out for you, including other eligibility requirements. You will find an outline of the essay questions, as well as an explanation of the selection process, starting with the review by alumni, then there's regional interviews, and finally, about 33 of you will go to national interviews in the East Coast, in DC. Next slide. You will also find a gallery of notable alumni, and here are a few of them that I want to share with you that you may recognize. Cesar Conde, Teresa Ledger Fernandez was elected just this year to Congress, and she's representing the state of New Mexico. Henry Cisneros and Mari Carmen Aponte, who was an ambassador to El Salvador. At our website, you will find an even larger gallery of notable alumni from many class years and many walks of life, such as Colin Powell, Doris Kearns Goodwin, and many others. Next slide. Here's a photograph of our current fellows. This is the class that is serving today. You will find a link to their bios at our website. Next slide. And for those of you who are influentials, people who can help us identify other fellows, we ask you to please keep us in mind. If at all possible, if you're willing, we have some ads that are ready to go, as you can see there on the screen. And we would love it if you could plop these into your newsletters or your communications within your organizations or to your networks. We also invite us to present with you, such as today. The catalyst for today's webinar, as I said earlier, was the Latino Business Action Network and the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative. Next slide. So now we come to the best part of the program. We are going to call on our alumni to share with you some of their reflections on their White House Fellow year. So if we can bring up, let's bring up David first, David Iglesias. David, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, but also what you were doing when you were selected as a White House Fellow and how you prepared to become a White House Fellow.
Sure. So my name is David Iglesias, and I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I was defending police officers in civil rights lawsuits. Previously, I'd been a state prosecutor with the Attorney General's office in Santa Fe, and prior to that, I'd been a U.S. Navy JAG officer in Washington, D.C. I stayed in the reserves for many years and eventually went back on active duty. But I had heard about the program initially in the 80s, looked at the brochure, knew I wasn't competitive, and frankly forgot about it until my boss, the city attorney of Albuquerque, called me in and said, "You really need to apply." So I applied, and I was thunderstruck when I was selected because I really thought I wouldn't even make the first round. But it was a transformative year, and I view that as kind of a watershed experience for me. It changed everything for me.
Thank you, David. Now, David is too modest to share with you that he's also been on Jon Stewart and other programs. So if you want to know more about him, you need to Google David Iglesias. Okay, next, Carlos Del Toro, same question for you.
Thank you so much, Margarita. I had the pleasure of serving as a naval officer for 27 years. I was a graduate of Annapolis, and I was a naval officer when I got picked up to be a White House Fellow. I served from 98 to 99 under the Clinton administration. I was a White House Fellow at the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and I had the pleasure of serving for the director, who was then Jack Lew, and the deputy director was Sylvia Matthews Burwell. And if you know a little bit about politics, you know that those two individuals went on to serve in many capacities later on in the Obama-Biden administration as well, too. And today I'm president of a company called SBG Technology Solutions that I founded when I retired from the Navy in 2004. So for the past 15 years, I've been in the private sector as a small business owner.
Which is very important to today's audience because most of you are entrepreneurs. And Carlos is a prime example of someone who became a fellow and then later on chose to become an entrepreneur. So thank you, Carlos, for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Okay.
And unlike David Iglesias, I was not a guest on Jon Stewart, but I did attend once in the audience. So.
All right, very good. All right, now I would like to invite Erica Gonzalez, West Coast, Los Angeles. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. I'm Erica Gonzalez. I'm from the class of 2013-2014. I was in Los Angeles working in education reform. I'm kind of a community organizer, community agitator. So my profile was pretty different from the rest of my class. I had a nanoscientist and, oncologist. And so my background was not as traditional as some of the fellows. So it was a great place to be. I ended up being placed at HUD, which again had very little to do with education. So you have to be kind of open and ready for opportunity and really use your skills to translate into other environments. And it was a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Erica. So I'm going to go back again, and I want to ask. I'll start with you, Erica. Tell us a little bit about what was the highlight of your year of service, maybe something, and also maybe something you didn't expect.
It's hard to pick one. It was just so transformative. The education component of the program is just phenomenal. I had a very small class. We were only 12 fellows that year. So the education component is, kind of you and a cabinet secretary and your 12 classmates, and the ability to really engage and ask questions with thought leaders was just an experience I never thought I'd have. I had never been in kind of spaces and rooms like that. So for me, that was a highlight. And also my fellows, we call ourselves the ultimate fellows. And there is a photo of us, I think on the website. There's a class jumping, that's my class. We're jumping in front of the White House. And so it was just an incredible experience to build that level of network. And the truth is a lot of them I would never meet in my professional life. And so it's just great to have those resources to meet people that are doing great things in other sectors and building kind of connections to work and ideas that I wouldn't otherwise have exposure to.
Thank you, Erica. David, will you come on next and tell us a little bit more about the education program component as well?
Yeah, so you report to a principal, and in my case, it was the chief of staff to the Secretary of Transportation, Federico Pena. So I worked with the secretary and his chief of staff daily, but that you do more than be a special assistant to a cabinet official or the vice president or the president. You also meet with high-level leaders, and these aren't just government leaders. These are leaders from the private sector, from the military, from the media. So we met with Tom Brokaw, Bob Woodward, senators, members of Congress, and then we also got to do one national trip and 2 international trips and meet leaders there as well. So we went to Haiti after Operation Restore Democracy in 1994. We met the president, the newly installed Haitian president, Jean, what was his name? Aristide, Jean-Luc Aristide, I want to say. And we met in this cabinet room. That was thrilling. We went to New York City as well, met with newly installed Mayor Rudy Giuliani. We met former Mayor Dinkins. Ed Koch was around writing a book, so we talked to him. And then we had an international trip to East Asia. So we were in China, Beijing, Mongolia, and also South Korea. So we met ambassadors, members in the private sector. We went to a factory. I mean, it was a remarkable year. It's hard to condense my comments to the time that I have, but as I mentioned before, there's kind of a before and after White House Fellow experience, and this utterly transformed my life and my opportunities.
Thank you, David. So Carlos, will you share with us a highlight of your White House Fellows year?
Well, like David said, there were many highlights. Unquestionably, I think we would all agree that, you know, the bonds that we built with our fellow classmates and what we learned from each other throughout that entire year debating all the major issues in our nation and internationally was really the true highlight. But having said that, there was one moment that I stood out as very special to me. We had the opportunity to visit, to do a local trip to San Francisco. And one of the speakers that we met with was actually Robin Williams, the acclaimed actor and comedian. And, you know, on the surface, you'd think, oh, he's just an actor and comedian. Well, he's not just an actor and comedian. He's a brilliant artist. And I had the opportunity to lead that trip and was able to really get to know him for a short, brief amount of time. And out of all the speakers that we met with our fellowship year, he was the only one that actually, normally our bios would be sent to the speakers, and I'm sure they'd glance through them and looked at them. He memorized each one of our bios. And what he did was he took an element out of our past history, and then he turned around and poked fun at us during the dinner. And it was fascinating. And of course, he had a photographic memory, and he was, turns out, ironically, he was a master of military history because his father had served in the Army and he cared a lot about military history. And so it was just, and you get to not just meet these amazing Americans and, you know, as you know, as their officials, you get to know them personally. And in some cases, you get to build individual bonds with them over the course of time. Robert and I actually kept in touch for the next 10 years or so before he passed away. And it was just an amazing personal friendship that I made through the White House Fellowship Program. It was extraordinary.
That's great, Carlos. Thank you. Erica, do you have a story that you want to share with us that stands out in your mind?
I'm trying to think of one. I could think of one. We had the opportunity to meet the First Lady, and it was during the holiday season. And so we show up at the White House, and, you know, kind of all the holiday decorations are up, and, you know, everyone's kind of looking around, and First Lady Obama came into the room, and she just has this amazing presence, and she was very candid in our conversation. And so at one point, the Secret Service kind of comes into the room, and they tell her, you know, Mrs. Obama, it's time to move. You need to go to your next appointment. And she very gracefully said, I'm not ready yet. Tell them I'm going to be late. And she kind of spent some time additional time with us. And then when she was done, she left, and then the Secret Service came back in and said, you all have to stay in here because the president is moving around, the building. So we stay, and we're all very giddy, where we did our best to be very professional, while the First Lady was there, and she walks out, and we're all very excited after that. And all of a sudden, President Obama walks into the room and surprised us. And so we were not expecting that. And for all of us, it was just a very candid moment. He was very gracious, and these are my fellows, where I'm excited for all the work you're doing, and I'm hearing great things about you, and I can't wait to kind of connect with you some more. So it was just a really unexpected, special moment. And so I think that was one of the earliest experiences that was like, oh, we're doing something really different here and really unique.
Great. Thank you, Erica, for sharing that. David Iglesias, same question.
I'm going to say it was probably meeting the president of Mongolia. I mean, the only people that I've ever known that have been to Mongolia was my class and maybe one or two other people. I mean, it's just off the beaten path. But we picked Mongolia to visit because it was the first country in Asia to embrace communism, and it was the first country in Asia to leave communism. So we wanted to talk to the president and just get his perspective. So that is a meeting I'll never forget. And like the others, there are so many highlights. It's really hard just to pick one, but meeting a head of state is a heady experience, so to speak. And it's something that I think you get an opportunity to do as a White House Fellow more commonly than any program that I can think of.
So if I may share one story with you of my own personal experience. As you recall, I was living in Los Angeles before I got selected as a fellow. My hometown is California, it's Sacramento, which is where I'm today. But my year, which was 91, 92, the Rodney King happened. And at that particular moment in time, my class was in our foreign trip. We were in the Ukraine, we were in Kiev. And I remember feeling so helpless at that moment, watching, just hearing, because we only had radio access. We didn't have access to a TV at that moment, and we could only hear the reports coming in. And what I didn't know was that when I returned back to the States, and I was assigned at the US Department of Education to David Kearns, who was the former CEO of Xerox Corporation, he was chosen as co-chair for the economic recovery effort for Los Angeles. So that became my portfolio for the rest of the year. And I accompanied Mr. Kearns on all the trips to LA and meeting with all the leaders and witnessing firsthand how quickly government can marshal resources when needed. There was a very large interagency task force that was assembled rather quickly. Red tape was cut, and I was witness to all that. So it was so coincidental, right? Serendipitous that I was from LA. I was working at the Department of Education, that my principal was selected, and I went back to LA as part of my fellowship. So the White House Fellowship has sometimes been described as a front row to history because of moments like this, not just for me, but for many of us. We are, I said before in the previous webinar, like the Forrest Gumps, of the world, because we suddenly find ourselves in unexpected places, being a part of history, if you will. So let me get back to the questions. How has being a White House Fellow helped you in your career? And Carlos, I'm going to start with you, since you've had a dual career.
Without question, the remaining amount of time that I served in the uniform after my White House Fellowship, which was about 6 years, the lessons that I learned about how government functions at the very highest levels, which is really the purpose of the program. It's for you to come in and for one very quick year, learn as much as you can about how well or not so well government functions at the very highest levels, to take those lessons and then go back to the career field that you came from or are moving towards and apply those lessons to make life better for all Americans. And those lessons were very applicable in the military. And later on, when I decided to transition to the private sector and start my own company, without question, the experience that I had at OMB, understanding economics and how policy decisions at the highest levels for domestic policy impacted small business owners, for example, was of tremendous value to me in being able to ensure that I could apply those lessons and provide still greater abilities and capabilities and opportunities to my own associates in my own company.
And Carlos, tell us for what you do, what your company does, and how long you've been doing this now.
So I have an engineering company. It's a very diverse company, and it does everything from helping the government to develop space systems or satellites to working on submarines and ships. We also do a tremendous amount of software development when it comes to developing health IT systems as well.
Okay. And for those who want to look you up, what's the name of the company?
It's SBG Technology Solutions. We're small but good, SBG.
All right. Oh, very good. Very
You gotta
good.
have fun while you're doing it, you know?
Yes. All right. David, will you please tell us how being a White House Fellow has helped you in your career?
Well, so it gave me a tremendous amount of confidence just because of the level of competition. So if anyone out there loves competition, please apply. And if you want to serve your country for a year or longer, please apply, because you're going to go up against literally the best and brightest that this country has to offer from every sector, from the business sector, from the military, from non-governmental organizations. I mean, these are highly credentialed people. So when I was picked, I couldn't believe it, and it was an amazing year that I leveraged later when I ran for office. So I ran for State Attorney General of New Mexico, largely I think because the state party chairman knew about the White House Fellows Program and cleared the decks for me. I had no primary opposition and had a wonderful experience until the actual election when I lost by a couple of points. But what I didn't realize is that led to other opportunities. So I put my name in for the United States Attorney position under the George W. Bush administration. I was selected, I believe, because the people who recommended me knew about the White House Fellows Program. The senator who sponsored me, his former chief of staff had been a White House Fellow in the 1970s. So, I mean, it just plugged me right into this high strata of national leaders. And folks, don't think of this as just a government program. There are a lot of people in the private sector also.
Right, that's right. Okay, so Erica.
I think for me, the policy pieces were really critical. I've spent my career kind of on the local level advocating a lot of times outside of government. And so to be kind of at the highest levels of government and having to start a program. We were, during my fellowship year, it was a team of 3 of us. The president announced something in the State of the Union and we were responsible for making it happen. And so kind of a team of 3 starting up a whole initiative and really how you build policy at a federal level in interagency collaboration. It gives you a really good perspective and kind of very tangible skills on kind of cross-functional collaboration, how maybe potentially the pace of progress. That was one of my frustrations, to be transparent. I think when you're on the local level, you kind of, or even just in a company, you move things, right? There's a lot of urgency, and on the federal level, there's a lot of urgency, but how that translates is very different. And sometimes the idea you started with will look very different at the end, but typically it's often a better solution because you brought in other stakeholders, you brought in other departments, and you're able to do something that really impacts the whole nation versus, you know, just a targeted community. So I think for me, having that perspective and that experience to be able to do something at the federal level has really helped me do things differently when I came back to LA and started working locally again.
And Eric, I can't remember if you said, how did you find out about the fellowship?
It was actually an alumni, a former fellow. He was the CEO, the COO of our organization, and he was a fellow under President Bush. And he kind of just said, hey, you're perfect for this. Like, this is what you need. I'll help you. Like, and I didn't believe him. And he, you know, when the application, we had the conversation a little while before the application came out. When the application came out, he sent it to me and he said, apply. And so I applied almost out of spite. I'm like, he's gonna make me do this. I'm not gonna get it. I was so like embarrassed. And then sure enough, you know, I started to go through the process, and you go to regionals and you go to nationals. And so that was how I applied to the fellowship.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about a little bit, David Iglesias, about the nationals and regionals. Can you please describe that, what happens once you submit your application?
On my year, which was 1994-95, so we had over 1,000 applicants, and of those, about 130 or so were sent to the regionals. So I was living in Albuquerque, as I mentioned, but I was not sent to the LA regional location. I was sent to Nashville. I have no idea how that works. Maybe David Moore can enlighten us there. But you are interviewed by a panel of people, both local luminaries such as state party officials, media people, and then other business people from maybe the East Coast. It's rigorous. There are lots of questions, lots of panels. My year, we had to do an impromptu speech, which was something that I was able to do because of all the cases I've been trying. If you have a hard time thinking on your feet, I would practice that skill because that might come up again. And then I was fortunate to be selected for the nationals, and we were meeting at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, and there were about 33 or so of us. And it was more of the same. There were more interviews, more panels, higher level people. We had federal judges. We had Mary Steenburgen, the actress, was there. I think she was a friend of the Clintons. We had Wes Clark, who was then a two-star general. We had Edwin Moses, the Olympic athlete, who was on the panel. Roger Porter had been a cabinet official. So just a really good mix of both private and public sector leaders, and it was grueling. I mean, it was a lot of questions, and so some of these questions are very, very difficult. They're questions, if you are self-reflective, maybe you've thought about some of these questions. It isn't just questions like, what's the capital of Tajikistan? I mean, it's things that really try to drill down and find out what makes you tick. They're looking, among other reasons, or among other ways, to pick a group of people who can get along with each other. And I can tell you, my class of 17, we're still in contact. We just had a Zoom call this a few nights ago. So I had 16 new friends.
So Erica, let me go back to you for a minute. And you mentioned you started to go through the selection process. Was there something about the process that surprised you or you wish you had been better prepared for?
I think I probably should have had my foreign policy chops a little bit more. I think my particular, the commission, once we got to national level, there was a lot of military presence, a lot of international experts. And so most of my focus had been very, domestic policy driven. And so I think I had started reading The Economist, and I was kind of doing some of that prep work, but I think thinking outside of your comfort zone and being aware. You don't have to be expert, but I think just to be aware of the world around you and what's happening both internationally and domestically, because you will be asked. They'll also ask questions related to some of your peers. And so as they start meeting, as I mentioned earlier, one of the fellows that was selected is a nanoscientist. And so I walked in, I believe it was Wes Clark was also doing ours. And he's like, so tell me what you know about nanoscience. And I'm like, oh my, and so just, again, not being expert, but just, being thoughtful and being open to learning and kind of what's happening around you and the world around you, and being prepared to speak about it and give your opinions on it.
Thank you. Carlos, same question to you. But will you also give us a little bit of detail on one of the requirements, which is the policy memo to the president?
Sure. Well, the whole application process it's part of an amazing journey, is what I refer to it as. And I did not make it my first time. I applied twice to the program. I made it to finals my first journey, and then I applied several years later, and I made it all the way through the second time. And, as David mentioned, there's 1,000 people that apply. So you can imagine by the time you get to the 30 or so that go to nationals, every single one of them is quite competent to be a White House fellow, but luck and circumstances, that's life. I actually happened, I was in the Navy and I had 4 children, and one of my oldest son had a fever. I got a fever about a week before while I was at finals, I had 103 fever. That's life, it didn't pan out for me that first time around. But I share that story because, you shouldn't be turned off by the challenge. You should face the challenge full speed ahead, as we say in the Navy, and just give it your best shot. And if it doesn't work out the first time, well, then get up and give it another shot a couple of years later, and I'm sure that you'll be able to succeed when you finally get through it. I'm sorry, Margaret, you had a more specific question with regards to the nationals, I think it was?
The policy memo too, if you could explain.
The policy memo, yes. So I'm a Cuban-American refugee, actually, and you have to write a policy memo to the president. And I basically wrote a president that we should do away with the embargo on Cuba. Which was quite extraordinary for a Cuban-American refugee to suggest. And, President Clinton was an amazing president, and he was a policy wonk beyond all measure. And he took every single one of our policy papers and he annotated notes on the sidelines of our policy papers and later on sent them back to us. Obviously, he must have liked mine or I wouldn't have been accepted, perhaps. But but it was an extraordinary, again, it was just part of an amazing journey is what it was.
That's a great story, Carlos. Thank you for sharing that. I want to invite, there's another question, but we'll ask when we have Victor on the line. I would like to bring up former Commissioner Victor Arias. He served as a commissioner at the finals level, which is the last part that you do when you are about to become a White House fellow. So can we bring up Victor? And he's a special guest today. I want to share with you that Victor is also very involved. I believe he's the chair of the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, the LBAN, and the Latino Business Action Network. And Victor and I have known each other for many years, but he was a catalyst for today's program. He reached out as a partner and said, can we do this? And that's why we're hosting this today. So do we have Victor on the line? I don't see his photo up here yet. Hi, Victor.
Hey, Margarita.
So Victor, as I said, was also a commissioner. And Victor, I was wondering if you could share with us, what was that experience like from your side of the fence, as a commissioner and seeing all these talented young people? What were you looking for?
Well, being a commissioner, being asked to be a commissioner was an incredible privilege. And I was appointed by President George W. Bush and served for 2 years. Didn't know what to expect. All I knew was that the other commissioners, I said, wow, I can carry their bags as well. But then reading through the requirements and what the program requires for all the applicants, the regionals, to get to that point, wow. I was just amazed by the work that had to be done, as Carlos kind of mentioned about his journey. But I would say that making it to the finals, there's 33 applicants, and I just can't believe that we're only going to pick 11 to 19 out of these 33. It's just unbelievable, the credentials and the service that is represented by all the applicants. Again, it's just unbelievable. And as you know, Margarita, and as every one of the other fellows knows, and this might have been true back then, there was a preponderance of military that participated in the program. And they were just, the leadership that just comes out of that is phenomenal, as Carlos can attest. I will also say, though, that I guess over this period of time, though, there's been more of an effort to try to get more leaders from community, from business, from other aspects. But again, it's just incredible to have seen the likes of Erica, David, and Carlos in those kind of interviews. It's just an incredible privilege. I will also say that the commissioners themselves are incredible. There's 30 commissioners, and it's another who's who of people that, one thing is to aspire to be a White House Fellows, and I hope that those that are listening, the entrepreneurs, you have what it takes to apply. You should really think about that. But as you sort of age out to somebody like me, you should consider thinking about that route to being a commissioner, because it's an incredible privilege.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor. Thank you again for being the catalyst for today's program. We really appreciate it. Okay, Carlos, since Carlos was a president of the alumni organization, he also served as a commissioner. So Carlos, will you give us some insight into that process?
No, I think Victor was absolutely right. It was extraordinary privilege. The year, if you become president of the White House Fellows Alumni Association, you get to serve only that year as a commissioner. And so I served in 2017 and was able to choose the class of 2018, 2019. And it's an extraordinary opportunity to meet so many talented people from so many different backgrounds. And without question, it's tough to make the decisions as to who will get it and who won't get it. But it's an extraordinary experience. And the year that I applied, David mentioned some of them, but others included Sally Ride, Cicely Tyson, Robert Yazzie, the Chief Justice of the Navajo Nation, Pauline Gore, the Vice President's mother, was a commissioner that year, Michael Beschloss, the noted historian, Nancy Bekovac, president of Scripps College, Antonia Hernandez, someone that you all may know, who at that time was president general counsel of the Mexican-American Legal Defense Fund. And these are people that you get to meet along the way, and you build friendships with them. Even if you're not selected. The first year I applied was 93, 95, and I met many commissioners that I still remain friends with to this date. And your fellow candidates that you're competing with as well too. I always like to say one of my closest friends was someone who didn't make the cut, and him and I went to regions in Atlanta, and we became the closest of friends, perhaps even closer than some of my current fellow friends. So it's all about the journey, and it's a great opportunity. It's a great country we live in that affords all Americans to apply to these types of programs, because many of us, don't be turned off by the pedigree of some of the candidates that you might come across. Yes, some do come from Harvard and Princeton and a lot of other prestigious colleges. Others don't. Candidates come from all backgrounds, and it's really that collective experience that you have had. Many come from wealthy backgrounds. Many, many, many more come from very, very poor backgrounds. I grew up in Hell's Kitchen before it was expensive to live there, you might say. In fact, in the days of West Side Story. And ironically, Rita Moreno, I understand during the Bush years, was a White House Fellow Commissioner. So I to all of you, I say, build up the courage, spend some time planning, and apply to the program.
Thank you, Carlos. So I want to invite David Moore to come onto the screen. But while we're doing that, if any of you want to answer this question, are there any common characteristics or traits that you noticed amongst not just your class, but all the fellows that you've met? Carlos, we'll start with you.
Focused, persistent, very detail oriented. Obviously, many fellows tend to be policy wonks. We're very interested in how public policy shapes American society and many different world, global society in many different ways. Those are a few of mine.
Okay, Victor, let me ask you really quick. What did you notice about the group?
So I go back to the comment that President Johnson made, even though he pronounced fella. He really talked about vision. And I think that's really, really critical and important, as you said, Carlos. And And also he talked about being a pragmatist with judgment. That's a very wonderful description. And it's like, and I'm an executive recruiter in my day job. And so I do a lot of board searches, CEO searches. The thing I look for typically is not necessarily what the answer is, kind of like what Erica said. It's how you answer the question. You're put into situations where you kind of have to think on your feet and be critical, a critical thinker. It's about how you sort of manage that situation. In my mind, that's what I look for. Somebody that has the chops to stand there and to be able to defend and to just talk about their vision of what they think. So that's my answer.
Thank you. So let me take a moment, and David is our executive director of our alumni organization. Thank you, David, for joining us. He's also been answering some of the questions that have come in the chat. David, would you like to add something to what we've said so far?
No, I think everyone has given a terrific overview of the program. So I have nothing specific to add beyond what you guys have already covered. Great job.
Well, let me get a little specific. Tell us a little bit about your year. Where were you? What did you do, etc.?
All right. I was an Air Force officer at the time, a couple of years before Carlos when I went through the program. And I was assigned at the State Department working on Latin American arms transfer policy with South America, Taiwan and arms transfer policy, and also preventing, as we said, bad things from going bad places. And by that, we meant specifically arms and WMD going to North Korea and Iraq at the time. And so that based on my background as a military officer, I felt I was able to bring a lot to it, but gave me the chance to see foreign policy from the other side of the river, working at the State Department rather than in the Department of Defense. So that was very impactful to my success in the military after that.
Thank you, David. Now, let me ask you about questions. Are there any questions maybe that were asked or have not been asked yet that you would like to share with the audience?
I'd like to elaborate on one of the questions. I thought it was very insightful. Someone asked, could I write my policy memo about an area that's part of my, in my wheelhouse or outside my wheelhouse? And I would say answers will vary depending upon which White House fellow you ask. Personally, I think the memorandum to the president is a unique opportunity in the application for you to show your breadth of experience, and so that you don't come across as a one-trick pony, if you will. I always tell teachers, don't write about education policy. Doctors, don't write about healthcare policy. Military officers, don't write about military things. Write about something outside your discipline so that you can show the commissioners that you have a breadth of experience and capability and can advise on a range of issues. Because keep in mind, they're selecting White House fellows to be special assistants to senior officials. And what they want to know is that you can advise on something outside your particular area of expertise because you have a strong command of a range of issues. And that, I think, is one of the things I would suggest for the written application of Big Daughter.
Great, thank you. What about a highlight from your year?
Highlight from my year, meeting Desmond Tutu in South Africa.
All right.
He's one of the most amazing human beings.
We've
definitely a highlight.
Yeah, we've talked a bit about the trips. Hopefully by the time this group comes in, we'll be past the current state of affairs that we are now. But could you talk a little bit about how those trips happen? How do they become a reality?
Sure. The commission office will plan generally a domestic trip and an international policy trip during the course of the year, and that's exactly how the destination is selected and the policy topics to be investigated are arrived at varies from year to year and class to class. I know last year's class, right before the pandemic, they had been, the White House Fellows had been invited to go to Japan as guests of the government of Japan because of a trip that they had had a few years before that was so impactful there. The Japanese government extended an invitation, please come back. So they were planning to go to Japan and go to Europe as well later in the year. And unfortunately with COVID-19, they made the decision that that's not because the trip was going to be in February. It would probably be best to hold off. So what we're hoping is that we'll be able to resume international travel this year, but normally that is a component of the White House Fellows here.
Okay. David Iglesias, do you have anything to add?
Well, that's a really broad question. Can you maybe narrow it down a little bit?
Well, let's talk about traits again. Let's go back to characteristics.
Yeah.
Traits. What have you noticed? Not just your own class, but you go. Oh, let's talk about the Alumni Association and what happens after you become a fellow. Go ahead.
So I think some commonly shared traits is the ability to talk intelligently about just about anything. So broadly educated, broadly experienced, high IQ plus high EQ. I mean, just really well-rounded, intelligent people who really want to make a difference and probably have the experience and education to do it.
Okay, great. Let's see. Erica, anything you want to add?
Actually, when David was talking about the application, even outside of the policy memo, there's other questions. So make sure you're able to highlight your different experiences and the different things that, skills and talents you bring to the program. Because if you just, I didn't write my whole essay just about education, right? There were components where I talked about education. There were components where I talked about other kind of aspects of my career or other experience. So really use it to kind of show the wealth of experiences that you've had, and instead of just kind of nailing your primary expertise or your current experience, because it helps showcase you as a well-rounded individual.
Okay, thank you. Carlos, what about you?
One additional characteristic I'll add is passion, and it's one of my favorite. I think passion defines White House Fellows in so many different ways, and it really to sort of transition into after the fellowship, White House Fellows go back and pursue their own passions in life. Many of them go back to their the career fields that they came from, whether it be teaching, whether it be engineering, or the armed services. Obviously they'll go back to the armed services, but they go back and they really do apply all these lessons that they've learned and relationships that they've built, and they put them to good use throughout their careers and their lives. And non-for-profit management, for example, I would argue there's probably 15 to 20% of White House Fellows that in one form or another are deeply involved in non-for-profit management of one sort or another. Again, working on the needs of our nations and feeding those passions. So it really is extraordinary. And the Alumni Association, of which there's over 800 living alumni now, they stay very well connected. They really do. And they try to help each other out, and not just as individuals, but try to help each other out with their own projects. I just recently in last year had a more younger White House Fellow graduate approached me about a non-for-profit that she wanted to start to try to bring high tech to facilitating a foster parent being able to become a foster parent. And that non-for-profit has just taken off and has impacted the lives of tens of thousands of children that don't have parents. So it's an extraordinary opportunity. It really is.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. So as we wrap up, I want to invite Victor to come back on. And Victor, as our partner today, just tell us really quickly what LBAN SLEI is, if people want to get more information about you as well.
So the Latino Business Action Network was founded back in 2012. There's a professor by the name of Jerry Porras who wrote a book called Built to Last. I think many of you may know that book. He co-authored it with another guy. But Jerry is originally from El Paso, which is where I grew up as well. He was a professor at Stanford, and he wanted to really think about what kind of lasting impact he could leave. And so we sort of boiled the ocean and settled in on entrepreneurship as the area that we could try to have impact. And that impact is around three areas. One, it's about creating jobs, creating wealth, because with wealth comes the ability to reinvest and make some change, to create jobs for the whole country. And number three is to create leadership, where sometimes we have voids. And so we use entrepreneurs, the top 3%, we look to them, we target them. They come through a scaling program at Stanford. We've had 10 cohorts now. We have 750, 800 alums that have gone through this program. Lots of proof in the pudding in terms of scaling. These companies have all scaled. They're all $1 million plus businesses. And, it's just about making an impact, not necessarily in the Latino community, which we are, but it's in our country. Latinos over-index in the formation of new businesses in this country by 3x, 4x to 1. If it wasn't for Latino businesses, you wouldn't have the growth in the market. Latinos are the new mainstream economy. So we're very, very focused on how that impacts our country. And that's our focus. And we're just very proud of our alums, many that are on this program. And I also want to say, Margarita, you have an incredible story to tell, and I'm sorry you didn't share more of it, but you have an incredible story how you've sort of broken a lot of paradigms. And I love the story about when you went to your employer at Chevron and told them about what you got.
Okay, so I will share it really quickly. So at the time, I was an executive on loan, as I said earlier, from the private sector. I was working as an environmental engineer at the second largest refinery in California. And I was tapped on the shoulder by someone. He was actually someone who had applied to become a White House Fellow, but didn't make it. He made it to the finals. But to his credit, this person continued to look for future White House Fellows. And my immediate reaction was, I don't think my company is going to be pleased if I ask for another year, right after this one, because they've given me the year to serve as the leader of a nonprofit. So I decided, initially I said no, and my other hesitation too, I will be honest, is I'm a Democrat, and it was Bush Sr. was the year. And I thought, I'm not sure I want to do that. But this person sent away for the application and handed it to me. And after I looked at it, I had it in my hands and I was flipping through the brochure, I decided within 10 seconds, yes, this is something I want to do. And so I was like one of those battleships. I just turned around completely and went for it. But I didn't tell my employer at the time, because honestly, I didn't think I would get that far. But when I finally made it to finals, I said, oops, I need to say something. And so I went into the corner office, and sure enough, the first thing my boss said to me was, so Margarita, you must not care about your career. And I'm like, okay, I was prepared for that. And I went into my pitch of what is the White House Fellows Program, because obviously he was not aware. And so at the end of that, he leans back in his chair and he says, okay, he says, so I guess this means that you want me to kick it up the chain. And I said, I think that would be a great idea. And so fast forward, and we are now at the finals in the DC metro area. And I'm at the opening session, and someone comes and taps me on the shoulder, one of the servers, and he says, are you Margarita Colmenares? And I said, yes. And he said, well, Madame, you have a telephone call. And so I'm walking over to pick up the phone, and I'm thinking, only my family knows that I'm here at this undisclosed location. And I'm worried. And I pick up the phone, and there's a booming voice comes out the other line, and he says, hello, Margarita, this is William Price. I'm the CEO of Chevron Corporation. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, like I don't know who you are, okay? And so he basically tells me three things. He says, A, I want you to know how proud we are of you. B, He says that if you get selected, you'll be the first person in our company's history to be selected as a White House Fellow. And then the third question he asked was, who can I call? By that point, it was too late really to call anybody. And in any case, you know, he gave me wind in my sails, so to speak. And I went through the finals process with a lot more confidence, you know, knowing that my company was backing me 110%. So different people do different things. David will share with you that it's not required that you tell your employer, but of course it's always recommended. David, do you have anything you want to add on that point?
If you mean this, David?
I think it's David Moore.
Yes, David Moore.
No, Margarita, nothing to add.
Okay.
Wonderful.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? The last chance to make some final comments. All right, Jen, let's go to the final slides. So we did our best to answer, I think we answered all of the questions that came in on the chat today. But if for some reason you cannot find answers to your questions on the websites that I previously mentioned, and you will be getting those links in a follow-up email, then you can also write to us at recruit@whitehouse@whff.org. And again, look over the materials first. If there's a specific question that you have that is not answered at any of our websites, then please feel free to contact us. You can also use this website email address if you would like to partner with us and help us spread the word. Again, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure being with all of you, and I look forward to maybe reading your application. Okay, thanks again.
Thanks.
And thank you, panel, for joining us. It was great to have all of you with us.